1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, similar to how racial movements like Black Lives Matter against police brutality or Stop Asian Hate against the abuse and oppression of Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Southeast Asian individuals, we tell you that all lives matter and hate crimes are bad. However, we need to be more specific. We empathize and understand the plight of these gender minorities, queers, trans persons, and women, but we think that Lady Justice is blind for a reason, and that the arc of justice, no matter what they tell you, should not bend, and we are here to keep it rigid and firm for the sake of their own interest and that of society. We believe that hate crimes by definition are quite vague and ultimately about some unnuanced kind of thing. Meaning, brother, what the fuck does it mean when you say something's a hate crime? We reject that particular definition and we want to be a bit more specific. We want targeted and specific definitions, such as defining a hate crime for what it is. It's something with intent, with malevolence, and something specific to these individuals. We want to call it out by saying, you burned their home, you destroyed their property, you catcalled the individual, you harassed them, unjust vexation, you stole their shit, you sexually assaulted them. These are categorical and semantic definitions which already exist in majority of parts of the world by virtue of codified law that they see in a constitution that is actually arbitrated by a legislative actual definition of it, and even arbitrated if you have an issue in the court of law through the judicial system. We think that these things are particularly enough, and the fact that you bastardize and butcher it by trying to say, they're particularly oppressed, let's lower the barrier, is a band-aid solution at best, but at worst makes the law particularly biased to these individuals. Two wrongs don't make a right. I said POI in chat, I'll take you in a bit. Meaning, it's precisely when we view it in such a liberal and progressive and woke way, it's exactly when you bend the arc of justice in a way that's bad. What is my comparative and counterfactual in this policy debate? Number one, assuming execution and arbitration is the problem, we're going to be able to push legal and judicial systems, both on the offender and the defendant, to be able to depoliticize all this shit and abandon these very vague explanations. When they say hate crime against my trans client, we're gonna burden push them to categorically and semantically define what they mean. Was this a form of catcalling? Was this a form of sexual assault? Was this a form of burglary and robbery? Of which we see exist in the status quo, and we think that on their side, government saying, oh no brother, they're discriminated, so we have to lower the evidence threshold and barrier. This is super harmful because you can't quantify what makes someone less racist or a bit racist lang. Are they gonna take an exam wherein they're gonna have to be arbitrated, and as a consequence, I assume you're gonna proportionally give them this barrier threshold? It's binary, ladies and gentlemen. If you committed this, and if you were found to be guilty based on the burden of proof, either through submitted physical evidence or that of a witness, the legal process, which we think should be the same in both sides, should arbitrate that particularly differently. Meaning, it's not that you're particularly biased against these particular women, particular gays. It's that you're an asshole, man. You are a particularly bad person, and these are the very nefarious actors we need to be able to call out and stop hiding against it. We think hate crimes by definition is ultimately not the way to go, and ultimately we want the court to be able to define it. But the second part here is to understand that, sure, let's say it's not about execution. This is taking them at their best, meaning there's something fundamentally wrong with the law. Then we want the status quo measures to be able to go against it, such as having a constitutional assembly or a constitutional convention, which I understand is hassle, but it's the necessary way to be able to edit and change the constitution that applies to all people, especially in instances where you think it might be biased. But before that, POI, go for it. 3.
Okay, so the justice exists. but hate crimes are continually perpetuated. How do you address the perpetuation of these hate crimes?
We think that the fact that you shroud and hide it behind this vague thing kind of in debate land makes it like, oh yeah, fuck, how do we deal with the systemic issue? But the reality is you have to keep probing and asking questions to unpack the statement. And that applies in the judicial process, wherein the harm on your side, if you lower the barrier for evidence, you ultimately codify and institutionalize that very vague definition of a hate crime, which we think is a very subjective, vague, and arbitrary metric. Meaning we need to be able to probe, like, okay, that particular hate crime, it was a matter of assault. You particularly hurt them. You punched them in the particular face, just like what we see with police brutality or that of Asian hate. Then we think the burden of that, regardless if you are black, white, queer, gay, or not, should apply equally, because the threshold in the law is created not to discriminate upon of which the Bill of Rights exists. Meaning these particular things are meant to be able to preserve the rights, the liberties, and the pursuit of happiness of all particular individuals. It's on our side of the house that we say that the rights of particular people have to be absolute, absent their particular gender, orientation, or sexual identity. And we think that the point in which you genuflect to that standard and bend the arc of justice in their favor leads to this catch-22 kind of situation and race to the bottom, wherein it becomes these particular individuals fighting against each other. And also, the question I have is, how do you determine which gender minority is the most discriminated? Like, will it be the same for a woman, a trans, or a queer? Or is it gonna be like specific and proportional to the situation? You understand, right? The reason why I spent so much time in my speech and my pre-oration explaining how that's particularly sketchy, of which the previous speaker was glibly unable to fully understand and explain, proves the point as to why it's probably a terrible idea. Meaning, even if at best you're able to lower that threshold, the question then becomes, are you going to lower it for other particular people in the spirit of being progressive or being liberal? That's exactly the race we want to avoid. And ultimately, we don't think that there's particularly a problem with the definition. Sure, there might be a problem in terms of execution. And that's exactly where we need to peel back the layers of the media and ultimately dig deeper on this particular phenomena and not bend the arc of justice towards anyone. We are very proud to stand on side negative. Thank you.